Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Grace Heppis. I am the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation. And today I will be sharing my story as well as what I've learned from the voices I've heard over the past year working in this position. So a little bit about me. I was raised by a very loving family in New York State, not city. Um, and that is me and my dad when I was little. He would watch TV on his recliner and he would put me on his chest and he would call me his blanket. Me and my mom share a love for peaches and puzzles, and my siblings and I share a love for fighting about absolute nonsense and then going out for ice cream after. So I earned a Bachelor's of Science in Clinical Neuroscience from the University of Rhode Island in 2024. I have misophonia, and I have been a participant in two different studies. So I started to experience consistent symptoms of misophonia when I was about 13. I say consistent because there were some isolated incidences before then. That first picture is me and my siblings at Disney World, and I just recall being absolutely miserable that entire trip. And I didn't understand why. And then the second picture is me and my very good friend Kaylee. We grew up together and we were neighbors and we were on the bus in fourth grade and I hit her because she was chewing gum. By the way, just want to clarify, I've never been violent since. That was the only incident. And I don't typically see anyone with misophonia acting out or being violent when it comes to their triggers. So um, at 13, I started to sit down with my family for dinner and not be able to stay. I would shove food down my throat so I could leave the room. And I would go upstairs and cry because then I would hear the rest of my family downstairs laughing and talking, and I couldn't sit there with them and enjoy family time with them. It was a really confusing time for me. There was a lot of invalidation because my parents and siblings didn't understand what was going on with me. No one knew what misophonia was. We didn't know there was a name for it until probably 2 years after I started experiencing symptoms. And I heard a lot of, get over it. It's just noises. What are you talking about? And this had a significant impact on all of my relationships, but especially with my parents because they were my biggest triggers, my dad especially. And when I refused to go to therapy for a long time because I had a stigma of I'm not crazy, I don't need help. I was in denial. And when I finally did, my dad said to my therapist, I don't want to be the one she hates. And I didn't hate him, but my misophonia made me feel like I did because I couldn't even be in the same room as him anymore. Before this, he would take me to my softball pitching lessons and we would go to McDonald's after. And then suddenly I couldn't be in the same room as him at all. It was him breathing, him existing was triggering me. So I felt very isolated at home and at school as well. I didn't want to tell anyone because nobody knew what misophonia was. No, I didn't think anyone would believe me, and they would say the same things that I was told by my family. And it took a long time for me to find the appropriate care. Um, we would go, I lived relatively close to New York City, about an hour and a half above. You'd think that a major city would have all of this care and someone specializing in it, but there wasn't. So we would travel in the tri-state area and I would just be really upset because I would go to a doctor and they'd be like, well, tell me what misophonia is. And then I would start crying and say, how's this person going to help me if they don't even know what I'm talking about? So that was extremely hard. It was very embarrassing. I would be at a restaurant or in public or at school and just start crying and being really upset because seemingly over nothing. And I felt like I looked like a brat or just an annoying teenage girl. And this led to some severe depression for me. And unfortunately, it led to a point where I did almost take my own life. And luckily, I had the support and resources to not do that. And that's me crying in my own house I couldn't do anything without headphones on anywhere. And thankfully, I learned that an extreme side part does not look good on me. So we've learned since then. So from my experience and what I've learned from talking to lived experience people every day for the past year and few months, this is what I think clinicians and researchers need to know about misophonia. There is a significant impact on daily functioning in the home, everywhere, and being validated is so important. Like I said, I would go to these doctors and they wouldn't know what I was talking about and would maybe try to diagnose me with something else, or and we hear this a lot when people reach out to us. There's a huge physical and emotional impact as well. My heart would race, I would get really, really tense, and I've learned that it's so different for everyone. I thought that going into this position that my experience was the experience, but that's not true. People have so many different triggers, how their body and emotions react when they're triggered. It is very different for everyone. And there was a huge harm caused by lack of clinical awareness, as we've seen, and why most of you are here today. And again, everyone's very different. It's very, very distressing. So I urge people to lead with compassion when they're doing research and make sure to inform people if there are going to be trigger sounds in your research. And also, please include the family in both research and clinical practices. This affects the entire family, not just the person with misophonia. And it is extremely exhausting to be constantly misunderstood. So, all through that struggle, I did find hope. My first conversation I ever had with someone with misophonia was Adil, who is the host of the Misophonia podcast, back in 2022. And that just opened my eyes to a whole world of people who also experience what I experience. I learned to communicate openly with my loved ones. That's me and my parents at a restaurant. If you had told me when I was a young teenager that I'd be sitting in a restaurant with my parents without headphones on, I would not believe you at all. I've seen how rapid everything has moved in this field. I was 13 only 10 years ago, and everything has changed so much since then. And I have found hope in taking action and being in this position and being able to turn it around and help others who are like me and tell them that they're not alone and help them find care. So I just want to say thank you to the MRF, the Miller family, and the Brown family for making all of this work possible. To the Seymour team for being very supportive and for the amazing work they're doing. To everyone here to all the lived experience people. I know that being in this room could be pretty difficult right now. So I applaud all of you and everyone who's here to learn more. And then especially to my mom and dad who fought tirelessly to make sure that I got everything that I needed to live the life that I'm living now.
Thank you, Grace. Next, we will call up Sophie Yang, founder of Teen Miso.
Hi, thank you, Lauren. Just really quick, I have a question for you guys. How many of you guys heard of or have taken the SAT exam in high school before? Yeah, yeah. So you all know the pressure and the preparation and all that. And last Saturday, I took the SAT, and then all my prep went down the drain. And as a teen who's had misophonia for about 5 years, I didn't expect everyone around me to know what I was going through. But I did hope that the systems that were meant to support me, like the testing accommodations, would dedicate themselves to best supporting their students. But it wasn't quite effective, and it reminded me that we still had a really long way to go, and it brought me back to all the other moments where I experienced my misophonia. And the people in charge with helping with my accommodations didn't actually know what my condition was, even though it was listed, or they didn't know what I needed the accommodations for. So I ended up facing my biggest nightmare, which was a quiet room with 26 students. And of course, the staff was more than friendly and they tried to troubleshoot. But in the end, I had to kind of grit my teeth and then just pray my score wouldn't be demolished. I'm Sophie Yang, and I'm a 16-year-old junior from California, and I'm also the founder of TEAM, also known as Teens for Education and Advocacy on Misophonia. A little bit about me is that I love music, I play a bunch of instruments, and I love to read and write, and I love art and all of that. And the morning of the SAT really took me back to all the moments when I started to experience misophonia and all the progress that we still have to make. Oh, wrong slide. It's hard for me to pinpoint the first time that a trigger actually began to affect me with misophonia. For me, I think it was a very gradual process, and it was quite difficult for me to notice. But a lot of it happened at the dinner table where I would sit between both my parents. So I'd essentially be getting hit from both sides. And it started getting worse with every dinner, and then worse with every single place I went to. And I started recognizing sounds I hadn't before, and it was kind of this buildup, realizing that each trigger affected me. And I felt like a living nightmare because there was virtually no escape for it. And explaining it to other people was really difficult, especially at the time when I didn't realize there's a name for this yet. And it was very isolating, like I was always on the lookout for this danger. But after a quick Google search, learning that there was a name for this gave me a lot of relief. And then these online communities or forums and all the research that you guys posted were kind of like lifelines. And so I began to research even more. I experimented with a lot of different things. Oops. I experimented with a lot of different things like therapists, acupuncture, more homeopathic things, chiropractic, exercises, lifestyle habits. And of course, none were a direct cure, but a lot of these did help to alleviate the symptoms that put a lot of physical stress on my body. And I told my parents and I broke the news to them by texting them a bunch of articles. And they trusted me, so we adjusted, and this became separate meals and only eating out once a year, which was quite difficult. But I also began this isolation in middle school, and it began to extend to my social life and my academic life. And I felt a sense of shame every time I experienced these symptoms. And I only told one of my former friends during this period about misophonia, but she dismissed it very quickly, so I rarely mentioned it again during middle school. And then by my first years of high school through freshman and sophomore, I profoundly struggled and it became really unbearable. And even with a 504 plan and really supportive parents and a great counselor, it was still pretty bad. I told my friends in high school at this time, though, and it was much more well received than the people in middle school. Um, but I still did lash out a lot at my friends. My grades fell significantly a lot, and I racked up over 80 absences in a year, and I had more missing assignments than assignments actually completed. I created Team, or sometimes referred to as Teen Miso, in late 2023, so this would be towards the middle of my freshman year. And I was tired of letting misophonia rule my life so deeply through my social life, my academics, and I wanted to turn that pain into something that other teenagers could see or relate to. And I feel as though teens are often unheard, although the majority of them are actually teens in the population of people with misophonia. So I felt like there's a gap to fill for that teen voice, essentially. And when I first started, I didn't really know how to achieve my goals. I just kind of had this vague idea of what I wanted to do, and I wanted people to feel heard. So I just started by cold emailing a lot of people, which a lot of them are actually in this room right now, I think. And we posted online interviews, posted their written responses. And I think the first big move for me was when the congresswoman of my district in California invited us to chat with her. And so I briefed her on what misophonia was. She had no idea, but she was really receptive, really supportive, and it really encouraged me to continue forward. And it made me a lot more confident. So from there, my route seemed a lot more linear. I chatted to reporters, had interviews and articles covered, and I got invited by these lovely people who are hosting the event today. And it felt like progress was actually being made with every step I took, like I was actually conquering my misophonia. And during the creation of Team, I kept working on my own growth and my mental health and my mindset because I felt like it would be hypocritical if I didn't have the space to support others while I couldn't support myself. But a lot of advice I got was to lead a healthier lifestyle, which did feel a little bit dismissive, like I couldn't be healthy while I had misophonia. But I learned that for me, it was actually the small, steady habits that had the best impact for me. And a lot of that looked like keeping myself moving, actually sleeping 8 hours, and moving physically, or just playing my instruments and turning noise into a more positive experience for myself. I had to help my body feel stronger and help myself feel more secure. And through every habit and stride I took with the team, or every stride I took with opening up to my friends and family, I felt like my life was a little bit more bearable because I wasn't fighting myself as the enemy. I feel like misophonia is framed a lot as a clinical puzzle, but teens living it with it every day already practice this form of survival science. And I think creating a voice for misophonia means that showing it's actually real, significant, and not a phantom issue, and addressing the condition as a whole for the person instead of just symptoms and triggers. I think of a close friend in me who has misophonia symptoms, and we both instinctively notice every sound around us, and we're always aware of what might bother us next. But we learned a lot to not demonize the condition or to let it define us. And there's real strength in these shared struggles, which I learned through my not only my friend but through team. Um, it's just support groups, resources, checking on other people, and turning that pain into action. Misophonia is more than these just triggers, and it shapes your daily life a lot, and it ripples through families and friendships. And even when it's important to understand that the profound effects that misophonia can have, it's just as important to see the people who live with it can actually live really normal and rich lives. And there's a silent empowerment, I think, that comes from living with misophonia, even though many people perceive it as this profound struggle. Misophonia taught me a lot about progress, and it's not just about finding a cure and finding clinical support for people, but it's about understanding people. And when clinicians, educators, families, and the people around them in their social circle, they don't learn just about misophonia. They learn about their perseverance, their creativity, and the ways that young people actually have to adapt to this world to learn. And I still face triggers every day, although it's a lot better than when I was in middle school and always having my headphones everywhere I go. But I also see how powerful it is when someone finds a way to um, have support and when people believe me or other people with misophonia. That open ear really means a lot to people. And when teens and other people work together, we turn a condition that isolates into a movement that connects. And I think that's how progress has truly begun. Thank you so much to the Misophonia Fund for inviting me and all the people in here who I did interviews with. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. Next up, we are going to have Dr. Jeff Brown, University of Illinois. To the speakers, I meant to mention this, sorry, before, there is a timer here, in case you didn't notice, that just to help you with the timing. And it's been perfect so far.
Well, good morning, everyone. I was recently in a professional setting where we were making really important decision that could quite literally have affected the long-term well-being of the institution that I was working with at the time and its sort of clients or participants for years to come. I prepared deeply for the meeting and I had to listen very carefully because there was a lot of important decisions that were going to be made. And partway through the meeting, one of my colleagues started chewing ice. And it only took about 1 minute to escalate from I hear it to I have to leave the room. And it was a really inopportune moment to have to leave the room because this is a really important professional situation, but I did have to exit the room for a moment. And people are like, Jeff, this is not a great time to leave, but I just had to go and sort of compose myself, sort of steel myself and to enter back into the room. Another example, more on the personal side, is 2 to 3 years ago. I was a little over 2 years ago that I lost my father, and in his last year of life, I wanted to spend every moment I could with him and cherish those moments. But in his final year, he had developed a habit of humming random notes on occasion, and I ran into this problem of I'm trying to spend this precious time with my dad in his last year of life. He is humming, and for what I consider to be completely irrational reasons, that was my mindset at the time, I was unable to to focus on our time together. And so I was trying everything, like, well, if I ask him questions and he's talking, he can't hum. Or if I distract him in some way. So these are just examples, and you've heard other really compelling examples today of both personal and professional life implications of this condition. I am a professor, but not anything related to this. I'm an economist, I'm a social scientist. I think a lot about research, but not about misophonia. If you have questions about your retirement plan, I'm happy to help. But I realized that in the room today, and I thought hard about like, what could I possibly say here? Because there's all these researchers and so forth here, and surely you understand what it is like to live with this. You do research in this area, and I'm probably the least knowledgeable person in the room about the condition. But I'm the most knowledgeable about how it's affected me, and so that's just what I'm going to be able to focus on as we go through the next couple of minutes. So I'll just say I'm used to giving lots of presentations and talking about research. I'm just not used to it being an anecdote of one talking about me. So bear with me as I talk through this. I first became aware of this when I was in elementary school. My father's father was living with us for a period of time, and he had this habit of cleaning his teeth with his tongue. And it made sort of a little bit of a slurping sound. And I noticed it, my sister noticed it, my mother noticed it, and it drove us all completely crazy. My father and my brother did not, but the three of us did. And it was only later that I realized that that wasn't the only circumstance that bothered me. When I heard Sophie just now talking about the ACT test, my biggest fear in high school or in college was taking a high stakes exam, whether it be ACT, SAT, or just a regular exam, and having somebody tapping on a pencil or chewing gum or eating a snack in the room with me. And this was back, I'm older than our prior speakers. This was back before misophonia had a name. It was back before we could do Google searches and find out that other people had this. And so I often went into those high stakes situations with an even higher level of anxiety than I think other students may have because of that fear. Now, growing up and having never heard of this thing, I just thought I was kind of weird. Now, it helped that my mother and my sister also dealt with it. So at least I had that little built-in support group. And if there was something happening in our family, we could sort of talk about it. But it's not something I ever really chose to talk about outside of my family. And in fact, today is really the first time I've ever talked about it outside of my own family because it's hard to find people that understand it. I have one colleague that I mentioned it to a few years ago, and how during our academic seminars, when they were over lunch, how it would drive me nuts when people were sitting there eating an apple or messing with their bag of chips. And so now my colleague refers to it as that weird apple thing. That's his explanation of what I suffer. So I've just chosen not to talk about it to others. I was delighted when I once made a post on, I don't remember if it was Facebook or Twitter, about the condition, something that had come out. And Steve, who I've known for many years and who I have enormous respect for, Steve and Diane, reached out to me and said, hey, my daughter has this. And we had a conversation. He told me about this fund, and I'm absolutely delighted. I want to thank you both for everything that you have done to bring this research and these opportunities together. Since learning about this, and since going to the website and learning about the work at Sussex and at Duke and at Vanderbilt and other places, I've tried to educate myself on the condition. I've taken every diagnostic that I can find out there. The way I would describe it is, on those diagnostic forms, I pretty much check every box. Yes, this bothers me. Yes, this bothers me. I'm fortunate in that I think the degree to which I respond to that is on the more mild end of things. But as you've heard, there are examples when I just have to leave the room. I've learned on my own without any help or any intervention or professional assistance to just find various ways of coping, whether it's the noise canceling headphones on an airplane, whether it's just distracting myself, breathing techniques, or various mental games of looking at that apple and figuring out, okay, I've only got 90 more seconds that I have to put up with this. I can find a way to distract myself. But over the years, I've also noticed a lot of other things that I've always wondered, I wonder if that is somehow related or correlated with having misophonia. When somebody online asked the question this morning about mesokinesia, I realized, I didn't know that had a name either. But watching somebody shake their leg or move constantly has many of the same characteristics for me as sounds do. You can feel your blood pressure rise. You can feel the anger rise, even for a perfectly wonderful person or someone that you've never met. There is this feeling of rage. And no, I've never committed violence or even said anything to anyone before, but those are the feelings you have, and they're not good feelings to have. I've discovered that when a family member who also suffers from it, my daughter, my niece, are also now in the happy group. When they point out that something's bothering them, I realize it bothers me as well. I've also discovered that sometimes if I think I hear a chewing noise and it's really bothering me and the sensations are going up, and then I realize it's actually not chewing, it's something else, sometimes the symptoms go away. And so it's a very deep and complicated and multifaceted condition, as many of you know, but that has always made it a bit mysterious to me. As a researcher and a scientist, albeit in other disciplines, I've often thought, is there a genetic component? I mean, we have my mother, myself, my sister and I each have one child with it. But I realized those are very difficult things to disentangle. Was it actually genetics, or was it just our shared environment? Was it a learned behavior? You know, watching my mother react the way she did, that I learned to do that. And I now see the red light, so I'll try to bring it to a close with just a couple other things. I've also, over my life, especially as a teenager, they're less now, but I've had a sort of series of like physical tics at different points in my life. Tic disorder, like, the desire to flex a certain muscle or to twitch an ear or an eye or something like that. And I have read some research that those things are correlated, possibly through some kind of brain function or brain structure. I'm really fascinated by this. Last year, I was visiting my mother in Ohio. There was a 60 Minutes episode on about people who do heroic things without thinking and about their own safety. And they found that it was related to overactivation of the amygdala. And when I started reaching that, lo and behold, I found a paper that suggested, it was a 2021 paper in the European Neuropsychopharmacology Journal, that said the amygdala is also involved in misophonia and some of the other things that I've experienced. And I thought, oh, this is fascinating. And to borrow a phrase from Alan Greenspan in my field of economics, I became irrationally exuberant to learn that there was potentially just like a physical brain thing that could in some way be related to all these various conditions that I just thought made me a little bit strange. And so, I go back to, I'll just finish on this note. I think it's the Temple of Apollo in Greece that has the famous saying, know thyself. And there is something incredibly peaceful, generating peace or a sense of calm or a sense of understanding in realizing, one, that you're not alone. Two, that this condition, whatever we want to call it, is more common than many of us think, and that it may just be due to some combination of genetics and brain structure and social conditioning and so forth. It takes some of the mystery away. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone in this room, whether you are here as someone who experiences it, whether you're a researcher, whether you're a clinician, because this stuff really matters, right? And I think that's sort of the point of today, to make sure that people really do understand that this is something that does affect people's lives to varying degrees. And the work you do, even if it never leads to a cure, even if it never leads to an easy treatment, just having the understanding and the knowledge is in of itself a huge step forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, for our final speaker for the panel, we are going to have Dr. Jane Gregory, University of Oxford.
Okay, I created these slides about 2 weeks ago. I was so confident that I knew what I was going to say and I was completely ready. And then I tried to say it out loud in my room this morning and burst into tears. So I have notes that I have written down because I don't know what emotional state I'll be in or how well I can remember what I wanted to say. So we'll see how this goes. I've been talking to lots of people about this for a really long time, but I've got some stuff to say today that I haven't said before. So it's already started. We'll see. Okay. So this is my twin brother, Chris. Growing up, We did everything together. We were always together. We walked to school together. We played the same sports. We had the same friendship groups. We ended up choosing the same subjects in high school, mostly because we were both equally as nerdy as each other. When we went to university, we ended up moving in together at university, and he switched his major to psychology because living together wasn't enough. We had to hang out and study together as well. Well, I studied, he hung out. But he was also my biggest trigger. And I think it's partly because we hung out so much. So we were around each other, and just, I think people with misophonia know that once you've experienced it, it just gets bigger and bigger sometimes the more you're around the person, but also because he was the most important person not to be triggered by. And we know from research in other areas, whenever you try to squash down and suppress and not feel and think something, it comes back even bigger. But these pictures are how I remember our childhood and early adult life. And the reason that was possible is because our mum, first of all, she was really good at validating our emotions. So I never felt embarrassed about how I felt with misophonia. But she also taught us to put other people first, to do what we could to help other people, but also do what we could to avoid harming other people. And that's great because it means I get to remember this, because I didn't want him to know the effect that he was having on me. So we still got to have those experiences. But it also meant that I was alone. There was no word for it. That was the 80s. This was 2001, which is when the word was first published, but I didn't hear that word until 15 years later. So I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know that I needed to know what it was because I just didn't know. Sorry, notes. Yep. Okay. Oh, good. I've said all the things I thought I was going to say in that little bit. So I thought I'd done a pretty good job of hiding this from him until 15 years after this photo. He sent me an article, which was the first time I saw the word misophonia, just with the comment, "This you?" And yes, it was me. And several other people in my life also sent me that article asking, "Is this about you?" And it wasn't literally about me, but it was about me. And I think a lot of people in this room can probably remember that moment where they're like, "Oh yeah, that's me." And I didn't realize that that was also other people. So for me, it fell into place, and I thought, I finally understand everything that I've experienced. I had finished my training as a clinical psychologist at that time. I was working in a specialist psychology unit for people with obsessive compulsive disorder and body dysmorphic disorder. Started thinking about how can we help people with misophonia using what we already know about these other disorders, and are there any similarities? But what I realized very quickly is I didn't know anything. I only knew what I'd experienced, and I tried to read the research. There wasn't much of it at the time, and there was still a lot to learn. I'm going to try and be quicker. So we started seeing patients, and they were doing well. They were really reporting that it was better. They were feeling better, but we didn't know why. And so I wanted to do research. So I started applying for research grants and got rejected for all of them because nobody knew or cared what misophonia was. And then I asked the misophonia community what they wanted. I asked them, if a researcher could answer your questions, what questions would you want to ask? And that proposal that I put together with the help of the misophonia community is what got me a research fellowship at Oxford, funded by one of the biggest medical research funders in the world. And it was this huge moment. I mean, it's Oxford. That was the biggest validation for me. It was like these two institutions saying, "This is real and you matter." Yeah, okay, hang on. Can't even see my notes now. I didn't account for that. So the community helped me to make that happen. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to keep working with the community to make this happen. And now I involve people with misophonia at every step of my research. I take people with lived experience to conferences to talk about their experience to clinicians and researchers. And I help journalists connect with people with misophonia so that we can talk about it to people who don't know about it yet. And then there was another part of my life where I was forced to know more about misophonia. I thought I'd kept it pretty well hidden from my kids as well, and I didn't want to influence them and their reactions to sounds. And then one day, we were sitting at the dinner table and my son said, "Hey guys, hands up who thinks dad's a disgusting pig." And I'm sitting there like, so these are my kids. Joe has a really strong reaction to eating sounds, but also loud sounds, repetitive sounds. He's generally overstimulated. And this is my daughter, Polly. Polly is a wheelchair user on and off. She has a physical disability that has made life difficult for her, and that we've had to work out between us how we bring these competing needs into our family. And that's helped me to understand the family life of misophonia, as well as just thinking about, like, it can't just be fixing one person's problem. We have to work out how we're going to all work together. And then all of that has led to being able to share what I know with other people so that other people can hear that word for the first time in lots of different places. My husband's a professional comedian. I took comedy training so that I could learn how to talk about misophonia. We've sold out our show about misophonia at 2 comedy festivals because so many people want to hear about it. And there are people there who see the title. It's called "If You Loved Me, You'd Breathe Quietly." They see the title and they come not knowing what misophonia is, and they learn about it. And I've snuck loads of science in there so that they can really learn about it. I'm going to finish, sorry. Just wanted to say, what's next? Who knows? These are some people that I now work with at Oxford. We've got 4 people working on 6 different misophonia projects that I'm supervising at Misophonia, which is so exciting to be able to keep spreading the word. And I'm still working with people with misophonia to try and develop materials that they can take to their health professionals to help support them with misophonia. Sorry, I know I'm completely over time, and I just want to finish on one thing, that one of the reasons it's so important to me is because I grew up being told that my emotions were valid, but I had to put other people's needs first. And this is a chance for me to correct that, because what I wanted someone to say is, what do you need? And that's what I want to give back to the community.
Thank you all for those powerful stories. We are now going to have our panel. So if the panelists, the speakers can come up, our moderator, Chris Edwards. I'm just trying to.
Oh. Check. Tech issues. Hi, I'm Chris Edwards. How's everybody doing? It's great to see everybody here. Thank you. Great to meet people I've worked with for years, but have never actually met. So thanks for being here. Okay, thank you all for sharing your lived experiences. This is really remarkable. I never thought that me, with a master's degree in theater directing, would be in front of a bunch of scientists and they would be wanting to hear what I have to say. It's pretty remarkable. So there's a lot of common themes in what you've shared. Outside of the misophonia world, I'm also active in the recovery space, and something that I've learned is that everybody's story is different, but also everybody's story is kind of the same in ways that we have these themes of when we discovered this in our lives and how it's impacted our families. I have a few questions prepared, and I'm sure I'll think of others as we go along, and then we'll open it up for Q&A here and online virtually. So some of the common themes that I noticed are
It's like you can't get your message across if people aren't listening, and it's a way to get people to listen. And so I feel like I'm being heard a lot more through that than in any other attempts to talk about it.
Very true. All right. As far as we've come a long way, the last few days prior to this, we've been catching up on the status of research and clinical methods or directions that we could go. And a lot has happened in just the last 5 years. I remember 8 or 9 years ago when I first started looking into misophonia as a thing. And like many of you said, I got through grad school before the word was even coined, and I didn't hear about it until, I don't know, it was 2008, 2009, something maybe. But a lot has happened. And when I look back, people sometimes ask me, how did you get through grad school? How did you do all these things with misophonia? And it did not have a positive effect on my mental health long term. I just hammered through, and that was not sustainable. I won't get into my personal story, but it doesn't get fun. And so things have come a long way. And when we look at the current state of research and so forth, what are some things that you would like to see in research that haven't happened yet? This is sort of an endless wellspring of ideas, but I'm curious what you would like to see happen next in researching this. Jeff, go ahead.
So, I mean, there's a couple levels to that. As I mentioned earlier, I think really understanding the complexity of the causes. This is not, as we all know, it's not just a hearing thing. It's not just a brain structure thing. It's not just a social thing. That makes it really hard to study. I mean, as a researcher, I understand that. But as I said, there's a certain amount of just self-understanding and grace that you're willing to give yourself if you have a better understanding of why this is happening. So that's number one. Obviously, you know, the ultimate goal, I think, or let me just say a really good outcome, one of many really good outcomes would be if we can find things that our rigorous research shows can actually help, whether that's cognitive behavioral therapy or whether that's, you know, the magnet work that you mentioned to me a little bit earlier, Steve, or whatever the case might be. I mean, that would be really great. At this point in my life, I sort of feel like I've learned to cope, but, you know, my daughter has it and she's early in her career, and I'd love for her to not have to deal with this on her own the way that, you know, our generation did. So.
Right on. Anyone else?
We've talked about this a lot the past couple of days, but more work with families and how it affects parents and siblings, and how we can better help them to understand and also cope with how it affects them.
Sophie? No? You are a researcher. What's the study that you want to do that hasn't happened?
I think it's sort of more of a general principle that I don't think we should delay treatment and support for people until we've worked it all out. But I think that we should be doing everything we can to learn from the treatment that we're providing. And that means that everyone who's doing treatment should be having some way of measuring what's going on and asking people, what was that like for you? What changed for you? Why do you think it changed? And learning from every single person that we work with.
Thank you. One of the hardest things about having misophonia, well, there's a lot of hard things. One is that it's very contradictory and confusing and infinitely complex. The more we talk about it, the more it seems like things that should make sense don't make sense about it. But when you bring it up with people, family or strangers, if you're brave, coworkers, what have you found works for you? And what have you found people are curious about? And what have you found doesn't work? We're talking about mainly communicating. Each of us has to, at this point, unfortunately, also be educators, and that's not easy. That means we have to be extroverts sometimes, and I think a lot of us really don't like that part. So what have you found as far as raising awareness for your own sanity, but also for the community at large, helpful and not helpful?
I'd like to get to a point where I don't have to do this, but sometimes I think I have to go to a point of explaining how much it's harmed me and my family, in order for people to take it seriously. Like if I just say what it is, people are like, yeah, I don't like sounds either. I'm like, okay, cool. Not what I meant. But I want us to get to a point where we can communicate it without having to share how dark it is, and for people to just understand it without us having to go into that.
Yeah, similar to Grace, I think when you mention a lot of other conditions that are more commonly known, you kind of automatically know the connotation that's associated with it. And it'd be great to see more of that associated with misophonia. And I find that when I explain it to people who don't know what misophonia is, I have to make a lot of comparisons to general life. And even then, it might not capture the full extent of what misophonia is like because they haven't experienced it. So, of course, it's hard to understand. So.
For me, the hardest thing has been the communicating it to the people closest to me, because for strangers that we don't have any history, I can just tell them the information. For my family for them to take it on board means them completely reorganizing their understanding of my childhood. And I don't think my parents are quite there. Like it was my full-time job working with misophonia. I wrote a book about misophonia that they read. And then we got on Zoom and they're like, oh, we're just having some cheese and crackers. It's just like, I don't know what else I can do. So yeah, I don't know if I'm doing it well or not.
I mean, I already told you, I tend not to talk about it. Maybe I will more after this, but so I don't have any good lessons to share.
Well, along those lines, I found I'm old, I've been doing this for a long time. I've found that I can connect the dots on things so much clearer now. I think you mentioned, some of you mentioned this, but Jeff, you mentioned it especially, that there are things that looking back, I didn't realize were misophonia things. And now I go, wait a second, now I get it. And lots of examples, for example, on the times in my life when I've lived in apartments, I've always insisted on top floor apartments, which people who helped me move hated because you have to carry couches up 5 flights of stairs, but that's because of the sounds of footsteps above me. Oh, that was a misophonia thing, and on and on and on. What are some things looking back that you've been able to connect the dots on now that you know what misophonia is and its infinite complexities, that you go, wait a second, that was a misophonia thing? Is there something that comes to mind of, oh, now I get it?
I remember speaking to my grandma for the first time about my misophonia. And because it was a long time before I ever spoke up about it with extended family. I kind of just left that to my parents. You can explain if you want to. And I remember her saying to me, you were a really miserable child. I was like, yeah, I was. I wonder why. And like I said with the Disney World trip, like I think that there's probably a factor in there that I didn't realize until later on when I realized that there was something wrong, and I probably didn't know how to communicate it at the time.
We've got about a minute before we start taking questions from the audience and online. Message of hope. For me, I feel like things have come a long way. And the work that I do is because I now can tell people, yes, it is possible to have a productive and rewarding life with misophonia. I don't know that I would have said that if I'd known what it was for years. So on the upside, what are some things positive that you could tell other people with misophonia who maybe are struggling?
That there's events like this
Oh,
and
yeah.
that people are studying it, and that there's a community out there, and that they don't have to do it alone. I mean, that to me is the biggest change, right? I mean, so you keep saying you're old, and I'm 6 years older than you, so I don't know what that makes me, but look, when I was growing up, like I said, the term didn't even exist. It was just considered a weird thing. You didn't talk about it, polite company. You just dealt with it. It was my problem to deal with, not everyone around me. I think just the fact that it's now something that people are recognizing, that it has a name, that we're doing research on it, that people are taking it seriously, that to me is tremendous amount of hope.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
Like just purely from my research, we did a study. There was a representative sample of the UK. So that means basically like 600 people who are representative in terms of age and gender in the UK. And 5 years ago, 14% of them were aware of the term misophonia. And 2 years ago, 30%. In a new sample, 30% were aware. So it's what we're doing is working, like it's literally working. And that makes me so happy.
I would also say, just in general, from the past few days at the Funded Investigators meeting, just seeing some of the results that we saw brought a lot of hope to me, and that, we're making moves on things that can actually work to help people with misophonia.
I find for me that I'm only 16, so I wasn't around for the time when misophonia wasn't actually a thing. But I feel like I've had the benefit of being born into a time where change is actually a good thing. And I found that things keep changing, and that's really great. There's so much progress, and people are changing the way they think as well. So it's been great, especially in Teen Miso, to just kind of talk to other teenagers and to see how their lifestyles have been changing and how their parents are changing too. So it's been great to see a lot of change going around.
Thank you. All right, I guess we get to Q&A. I have in my notes that we have 15-ish minutes for Q&A. Is that what this timer is showing me? Is that correct? We have 5 minutes for Q&A? Okay, that's all right. Just want to make sure I'm on time. If you let me just go wild, we'll be here for hours. I'll start telling jokes or something. Okay, let's open up for questions in the audience here, and then we'll go online as well. Anybody have any questions for our lived experience panel?
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you all so much for sharing. So I know Jamie kind of started to talk about the seeds of misophonia. And as a clinician, I definitely see that theme of just having more general sensitive nervous system. That's not always there, but one of the other themes I see is kind of the nervous system can be more sensitized because of like stressors in the environment, like a death in the family or a move, oftentimes puberty, middle school, what's happening there. So certainly not asking you to get into details, but just curious, because I think that often gets left out of the conversation. Jeff, you kind of touched on your dad's health was failing before that, around that one specific trigger. But yeah, just curious if you guys can comment on that. Thanks.
I guess I'm going first. Definitely in both directions. I think stress, other sources of stress make my misophonia worse. And then the misophonia causes stress. And so it becomes a cycle. And I don't think there's any, I mean, at least in my case, 100%, I think your hypothesis is spot on.
I'll just add, like, I fully agree that for a lot of people, having stressful events in your childhood can sort of sensitize the nervous system and make you more susceptible to misophonia. But I also know that I had like a stupidly nice childhood. Like I grew up by the beach in Australia, loving family, like enough money to feel safe and calm, and no major events happened, and I still have misophonia. And misophonia was the one thing that was the problem for me. So I also know that it's not just that. It's definitely not just that. But I do think it plays a part for a lot of people.
Mic problems. I agree. Yeah, my experience was, I can't think of anything specifically in my childhood. And I looking back in the 80s, right, nobody would have recognized this as a thing. It was not on anybody's radar. But I remember having visual triggers by 4th grade. I remember a girl in my 4th grade class who was a hair twirler and a hair chewer. And 40-something years later, I still remember that. And so by then I was having triggers. But I don't know of anything in my life that would have been sort of that instigator. So more research is needed, but I think there's a lot of probably contributing factors maybe. Right. Other questions? Good question. For the lived
Perhaps we
experience
can
guy?
switch over to Jennifer online.
Sure. Jennifer, do you have some questions for us online?
Yes, we have one rather large question, which is that you have all shown that you have strategies and that you have support in your lives daily. And people would like to know, was there a clinician or a type of therapy or resources that you each found the most helpful to finding strategies to support you?
I mean, it's kind of myself. Literally everything that I do and ask patients to do, I try myself, and that's what I've done for the last 10 years. And so, there's not one specific thing that made a difference, but after a little while, I started to notice that I wasn't noticing this as much, or that my reaction was much less here, or I could stay at the table when I otherwise would have left. And that was just from trying lots of different things, but I don't really know which things in particular made a difference. But I do think just continuing to test things out made a difference.
I mean, this is almost embarrassing to say. I've never mentioned it to a doctor or a clinician because, again, by the time I'd even heard the term, I was almost 50 years old, right? I mean, this was like a decade ago. And by that point, I guess I just sort of learned that this is part of who I am, and I had my own coping strategies. Probably not the best way to have done it. But, you know, if I'd raised it with somebody back when I was a teenager, the term didn't exist. So I don't know what kind of feedback I even would have gotten.
Not specifically for my misophonia, I would say, but I had a psychiatrist who helped me address my depression, and addressing that helped me kind of ease my symptoms of misophonia a little bit more. Like we talked about, just general stress makes it worse. So that helped me a lot. And just being validated was a really big part of feeling better for me.
I was a really stubborn kid, so every time my parents wanted me to go to therapy, I just resisted because I thought I was self-sufficient enough. And I wasn't, but later on, I found a lot of mild habits that I changed really helped support my body. And that just meant like moving, kind of just doing physical activity. I played a lot of instruments in my free time, so that was a very good coping mechanism for me. And I found just sleeping more actually helps me a lot because I thought I could sleep like 3 hours and not have any repercussions. So yeah, good sleep.
All right, thank you all. I think we're out of time. If anybody has any other questions for any of us about lived experience, it is a complicated thing, so feel free to catch us on the hall. But I appreciate all of you for sharing your vulnerable stories and personal struggles. I appreciate that. Thank you all for listening and including us in the work that you all are doing. So thanks.